August 24, 1942. 4:37 a.m. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The jungle is still black with night, thick air pressing down like a wet blanket. Insects scream from the trees. Somewhere beyond the palm-lined perimeter, the ocean breathes in slow, steady pulses. The men on the ridge can't see the horizon yet, but the equipment in front of them can. Inside a sandbagged shack crouched low against the earth, a radar scope flickers to life. Pale green light cuts through the darkness. Corporal Joseph Red McAllister, U.S. Army Signal Corps, leans forward, eyes fixed on the circular screen. He hasn't slept in nearly 20 hours. His hands smell of dust, sweat, and hot metal. Then the blips appear, not one, not two, a cluster. McAllister stiffens. He adjusts the gain, checks the sweep. The contacts hold steady, growing brighter with each rotation. He swallows. Multiple bogeys, he says, voice low but tight. Bearing 085, range 80 miles, high. Outside, on the crushed coral runway of Henderson Field, mechanics freeze mid-motion. Pilots snap awake in canvas cots. Engines that have not yet cooled from yesterday's fighting are about to be pushed to their limits again. This is not supposed to be happening. Across the water, far beyond the reach of American eyes, Japanese naval officers stand on the decks of their carriers and land bases with a very different mood. Confident, almost amused. For months now, they have dismissed the Americans as clumsy flyers, poorly trained, slow to react, dependent on luck rather than skill. In the ready rooms of Rabaul and Truck, jokes circulate freely. The Americans, one commander scoffs, they fly straight like students. Another laughs. They will not even see us until the bombs fall. The early months of the war have reinforced that belief. Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Wake, Java, American aircraft caught on the ground. Radar stations destroyed or ignored. Fighters scrambling too late, climbing blindly into the sun. Japanese pilots pride themselves on intuition, eyesight, and aggression. They believe war in the air is decided by the man who sees first and strikes first. Radar, to them, is a curiosity, bulky, passive, a crutch for the unskilled. They do not yet understand what is happening inside that shack on Guadalcanal. McAllister's radar is an SCR-270, primitive by later standards, temperamental, vulnerable to rain and power fluctuations. But tonight it works. The green sweep paints the truth with ruthless clarity. The incoming formation is large, organized, fast. He picks up the phone and cranks hard. Plot to fighter control, he snaps. This is Red 1, confirmed inbound raid, Angels 15 to 20, ETA 25 minutes. In another bunker, Navy Lieutenant Commander William Bull Harper listens, jaw tightening. He has flown against the Japanese before. He knows what happens when American fighters meet Zeros without warning, not this time. Scramble all available aircraft, Harper orders. Vector them exactly as I say. On the flight line, engines cough to life. P-400 Airacobras and F-4F Wildcats rumble, then roar, propellers chewing at the dark. Pilots run, helmets half-strapped, eyes sharp now with purpose. Lieutenant James Jim Holloway climbs into his Wildcat, breath fogging inside his goggles. He hears the radar call relayed through the control truck. Bearings, altitude, speed. For the first time since arriving in the Pacific, he is not guessing. The fighters lift off into the pre-dawn gloom, climbing hard. Holloway watches the sky lighten from black to deep blue, then to gray. Sweat runs down his spine. His engine vibrates through the seat, a living thing. Blue section turns starboard, the radio crackles. Climb to 18,000, you're below them. Below them, Holloway grins tightly, that never happens. High above, the Japanese formation presses on, engines steady, pilots relaxed. They expect the usual confusion, late intercepts, scattered resistance. One pilot, Petty Officer First Class Kenji Nakamura, scans the empty sky ahead, unimpressed. No fighters yet, he says over the intercom. Americans are asleep. Then his wingman's voice cuts in sharp. Contact 12 o'clock below us. Nakamura's stomach drops. Out of the morning haze, American fighters surge upward, not scattered, not late, but climbing directly into position, not chasing, waiting. For the first time, the Japanese pilots realize something is wrong. They have not been found by chance. They have been guided. As the first tracers arc upward and the formation breaks in confusion, laughter dies on Japanese radio channels. Commands overlap. Warnings collide. The Americans are already where they should not be. Back in the radar shack, McAllister watches the blips scatter across the scope. Contact, he whispers. They're engaged. He does not cheer. He does not move. Because in this moment, long before most men in the Pacific will understand it, the balance in the air has begun to shift, not through bravado. Not through eyesight, but through invisible waves bouncing off metal and flesh, turning mockery into surprise, and surprise into a trap, surprise into a trap. High above Guadalcanal, the sky fractures into motion. Lieutenant Jim Holloway tightens his grip on the stick as his Wildcat surges upward through thin cloud. The radio chatters with clipped, precise commands. Bearings, altitudes, adjustments measured in degrees and seconds. It feels unnatural, like fighting with a map of the future in your hands. Ahead, the Japanese bombers begin to break formation, silver shapes scattering as American fighters punch up from below. Tracer fire snaps past Holloway's canopy. He banks hard left, engine screaming, and sees a Zero flash across his nose, closer than he expects, closer than he should ever be this early in an intercept. This is not a chase. This is an ambush. Holloway squeezes the trigger. The Wildcat shudders as .50 caliber rounds streak forward. The Zero rolls violently, smoke trailing from its wing root. Holloway doesn't wait to see it fall. He climbs again exactly as instructed. Below him, the sky dissolves into chaos. Japanese pilots have trained for fluid dogfights, tight turns, instinctive reactions, one-on-one contests of skill. What they are facing now feels different. The Americans are not reacting. They are arriving. Petty Officer Kenji Nakamura yanks his Zero into a steep dive, heart-hammering. Has flown dozens of missions without fear like this. The enemy should be below him, scattered, late. Instead, American fighters keep appearing, always just off the nose, just ahead of his turn. How do they know? He shouts into the radio. There is no answer, only static and gunfire. Back on the ground, inside the cramped fighter control bunker, Lieutenant Commander Harper stands hunched over a plotting table. Wooden blocks slide across a map as enlisted men update positions from the radar feed. Sweat runs down Harper's neck despite the cool morning air. Red 2, climb 2,000, he orders calmly. They're breaking left. The words travel instantly, no flares, no guesswork, no frantic scanning of empty sky. Each American pilot hears exactly where to go. This is what the Japanese cannot see. For decades, Imperial Japanese doctrine has emphasized individual excellence. Pilots are trained to trust their eyes, their instincts, their spirit. Technology is useful but secondary. Radar stations exist, but coverage is patchy, coordination poor, and skepticism widespread among senior officers. An enemy must be seen to be fought. The Americans are fighting what cannot be seen. At WarVault days later, Japanese officers review reports from the raid with disbelief. Losses are higher than expected. Bomb runs disrupted. Fighters encountered earlier and in greater numbers than intelligence predicted. One staff officer suggests radar. The room goes quiet. American radar is primitive, a senior commander says dismissively. Unreliable, slow. Another adds, their pilots lack discipline. This was coincidence. The laughter returns, thinner now, forced. But over the next weeks, the pattern repeats. Each time Japanese formations approach Allied-held territory, American fighters rise to meet them, not late, not scattered, but waiting. Sometimes above, sometimes head-on, always in position. Pilots begin reporting the same thing Nakamura felt over Guadalcanal. They knew where we would be. They were already there. At Henderson Field, the radar shack becomes the heart of the defense. The equipment still fails sometimes. Rain interferes, power cuts out. But when it works, it changes everything. McAllister and his fellow operators learn to read subtle variations in the sweep. They can distinguish bombers from fighters by density, estimate altitude by signal strength. Predict turns before they happen. They are not pilots, they will never fire a shot, but they are shaping every engagement. Holloway begins to trust the voice in his headset more than his own eyes. When told to climb, he climbs. When told to hold, he holds, even when instinct screams to dive. And again it pays off. Japanese pilots, once confident and mocking, begin flying higher, faster, more cautiously. They change routes. They stagger formations. Nothing works. Because no matter what they do, the Americans seem to know. One afternoon, after another aborted raid, Nakamura lands hard at his base, hands shaking. He pulls off his helmet and sits in the cockpit long after the engine dies. "They are hunting us before we arrive," he mutters. The realization creeps through the Japanese air arm like cold. This is no longer a contest of skill alone. It is a contest of systems. And for the first time since the war began, the men who once laughed at American pilots are starting to understand something far more dangerous than defeat. They are fighting an enemy who can see in the dark. They are fighting an enemy who can see in the dark. By early 1943, the Pacific sky no longer belongs to instinct alone. At Japanese airfields scattered across the Solomon Islands and New Guinea, pre-flight briefings grow shorter and more tense. Maps are redrawn. Routes are altered again and again. Altitudes are debated. Officers argue quietly, then stop arguing altogether because no solution seems to matter. No matter how they come in, the Americans are waiting. Captain Hiroshi Takeda, a veteran naval aviator with over 1,000 flight hours, stands before a chalkboard at WarVault, listening as intelligence officers summarize the latest losses. He has flown since China. He has outturned enemies, escaped flak, watched friends burn. But this is different. They are intercepting before visual contact, an aide explains. Often climbing from below, sometimes already above. Take-to folds his arms. Impossible, he says at first, then he stops himself. He has heard the pilot's voices on the radio, the hesitation, the sudden shock. He has felt it himself. Across the ocean, American air defense is becoming something new. Radar stations, some no more than tents and antennas on ridgelines, are now tied together by radio networks. Fighter control officers coordinate Navy and Marine squadrons that once operated separately. Lessons are written in pencil, erased, rewritten after every engagement. Mistakes still happen, pilots still die, but the pattern is clear. On February 1st, 1943, another Japanese raid approaches Guadalcanal just before noon. Sun high, visibility perfect. This is supposed to favor the attacker. The radar picks them up anyway. Contact, bearing 110. Angels 20, McAllister reports, voice steady now. He no longer marvels at what the screen shows. He trusts it. Harper moves pieces across the board. Send red flight high, hold blue low, let them pass. Let them pass. Jim Holloway hears the order and frowns. Letting the enemy through goes against everything he learned early in the war, but he obeys. The Japanese bombers roar overhead, engines thunderous, crews scanning below for resistance that does not appear. Confidence flickers back to life in their cockpits. Then the trap snaps shut. From above, American fighters dive. From below, others climb. From the sides, wildcats slash through the formation, firing in coordinated passes. Bombers scatter. Escorts break off, dragged into fights they did not choose. Take-to, flying top cover, realizes too late what has happened. "They let us in," he shouts. "They let us in." His Zero lurches as rounds tear through the fuselage. He dives, barely clearing the clouds, heart pounding with something new, not fear, but understanding. This is not bravery versus bravery. It is information versus ignorance. After the raid, American pilots gather on the strip, faces smeared with oil and sweat. They do not cheer, they count heads. They listen to the debrief where radar tracks are laid out like evidence in a courtroom. "You were here," the controller says, tapping the map. "They were already turning." The pilots nod. They had felt it in the air. On the Japanese side, the mood darkens. Pilots request radar of their own. Commanders push back, citing shortages, priorities, disbelief. Some units experiment with early warning, but coordination lags. The system is fragmented, and in war, fragments lose to networks. The mocking laughter that once filled Japanese ready rooms fades entirely. In its place comes something worse, silence. Take-to writes in his diary that night. "We are no longer hunting," he records. "We are being received." Above the Pacific, the skies are still full of skill, courage, and death. But now unseen beams sweep the air ahead of every raid, measuring, plotting, preparing. The Americans are no longer reacting to the enemy. They are arranging him. They are arranging him. Spring turns to summer, and the Pacific War settles into a brutal rhythm. Missions fly daily. Losses mount on both sides. But beneath the familiar churn of combat, something irreversible has taken hold. The sky no longer lies to the Americans. At Henderson Field and across newly seized islands, radar units multiply. Antennas rise from jungle clearings like skeletal trees. Cables snake through mud and coral. Fighter control becomes doctrine, not experiment. Young officers are trained not just to fly, but to listen. Lieutenant Jim Holloway notices the change in himself first. Early in the war, his eyes had been everything. Scan the horizon, spot first. Turn hard, shoot. Now he trusts a voice he has never met more than his own instincts. "Turn now," he turns. "Climb," he climbs. And more often than not, the enemy appears exactly where promised. On May 14, 1943, a Japanese strike group approaches New Georgia under broken cloud cover. The weather should mask them. It does not. Radar plots the formation through the gaps, estimating altitude by signal fade, speed by drift. Controllers vector Marine fighters into the sun unseen. When the shooting starts, it is sudden and devastating. Japanese pilots do not even have time to mock. In Rabaul, Captain Take-to sits through another debrief, jaw clenched. He recognizes the names on the loss list now. Men he trained, men he trusted. They are not dying because they are worse pilots. They are dying because they arrive already defeated. The realization spreads upward. Senior commanders begin to speak openly about American control of the air, not superiority. Control. It is a subtle difference, but a deadly one. To control the air is to decide when and where combat happens. To deny the enemy surprise. To make every approach a gamble with stacked odds. American radar does not make their pilots invincible. It makes them prepared. And preparation compounds. By mid-1943, Japanese formations shrink. Raids come in smaller packets, lower, faster, hoping to slip through gaps. American controllers adjust. Fighters are held back, then released at the last possible moment. Again and again, the trap closes. One night, Take-to stands on the tarmac as another mission returns short-handed. Engines shut down. Ground crews count bullet holes instead of aircraft. A younger pilot approaches him, eyes wide. "Captain," he asks, "how do they always know?" Takeda does not answer right away. He looks out toward the dark horizon. "They are not guessing," he says finally, "and they are not lucky." In a distant bunker, McAllister finishes another shift, ears ringing, eyes burning. He steps outside and looks up at the sky, now empty and quiet. He will never meet the men whose lives he shaped tonight. He will never know their names, but he knows this much. The Americans have stopped flying blind. When news of radar-directed interceptions reaches Tokyo in full, it is too late. Production cannot match losses. Training cannot replace experience fast enough. A system built on individual excellence cannot outpace one built on coordination. The mocking laughter of 1941 is gone. In its place is a grim understanding. The Americans did not simply learn to fly better. They learned to see. And once an enemy can see you coming, truly see you, every approach becomes a corridor with walls you cannot feel until they close. Every approach becomes a corridor with walls you cannot feel until they close. By late 1943, the laughter is gone. In Japanese ready rooms from WarVault to truck, briefings are quiet affairs. Pilots sit with maps folded neatly on their knees, eyes fixed forward, listening without interruption. The war in the air has changed tone. It no longer feels like a test of daring. It feels like exposure. Captain Hiroshi Takeda stands before his men one last time before a dawn sortie. He chooses his words carefully. He does not speak of honor or destiny. He speaks of caution. "Stay with your wingman," he says. "Do not chase. If contact is lost, break away." Such instructions would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. Across the Pacific, American fighter control has matured into an integrated machine. Radar stations feed information to centralized command posts. Interceptors are launched only when needed, conserving fuel and pilots. Ambushes are no longer improvisations. They are planned. Lieutenant Jim Holloway feels the difference every time he straps in. There is less shouting now. Fewer last-minute corrections. The fight begins before he ever sees the enemy. On December 26, 1943, a Japanese reconnaissance flight approaches an Allied anchorage under heavy cloud. Radar tracks them anyway. Fighters climb unseen. The intercept lasts minutes. Afterward, Holloway circles the empty sky, heart steady, aware that something profound has shifted. This is not dominance through fear. It is dominance through awareness. Takeda survives the war. Many do not. Later years, he will speak candidly about what defeated Japan in the air. Not cowardice, not loss of skill. "Information," he will say. "We fought men, they fought systems." Back in the Solomon Islands, McAllister is eventually rotated home. He leaves behind the shack the humming equipment, the quiet power of green blips on glass. Others take his place. The system does not pause. That is the final lesson. Radar did not win every battle. American pilots still died. Mistakes were still made. But once radar-guided interception became standard, the war in the Pacific skies changed permanently. The Japanese had mocked American pilots as blind and slow. They had been half right. The Americans had been blind, until they learned how to see without looking. And when radar began guiding fighters straight into the enemy's path, mockery turned into shock. Shock turned into losses, and losses turned into a quiet, inescapable truth. The sky no longer belonged to the men who flew highest or turned tightest. It belonged to the side that knew where the enemy would be before he arrived. End.